Snow was falling heavily, blanketing the streets of the big city in pure white. The wind howled in gusts, cutting between the skyscrapers and carrying a chill that pierced the skin. In a hidden corner of the old bus station, Emma Lewis sat huddled on a wooden bench, her arms wrapped tightly around herself to hold on to the last traces of warmth. The thin coat, once her pride when she bought it with her first paycheck as a doctor, was now torn, soaked through, and powerless against the December cold. Emma, only 29, had once been a promising resident at the city's most prestigious hospital, but within a few months, everything collapsed. A wrongful lawsuit, sparked by her courage to expose fraud within the hospital, had stolen everything. Her medical license, her frozen bank accounts, and the tiny rented apartment repossessed by her landlord when she could no longer pay. The people who once called her a friend now turned their backs, afraid to get involved. Emma didn't blame them. She only felt hollow, as if the world had drained all life from her. Her lips trembled, her breath forming fragile white clouds in the air. She looked down at her worn-out, wet shoes and forced herself not to cry. "Just get through tonight," she whispered, "and I'll figure something out." But deep down, Emma knew it was only an empty reassurance. No job, no shelter, and the cold seeping deep into her bones, she wasn't sure how much longer she could last. Just a few blocks away, Ethan Carter sat in his black sedan, the streetlights casting a glow over his chiseled face. At 35, Ethan was a renowned attorney known for defending victims of injustice, from exploited workers to individuals crushed by the legal system. He had just left a late meeting with a client, his mind still replaying the details of the case he was handling. But as his car passed the bus stop, his eyes happened to land on the small, shivering figure on the bench. Ethan slowed down, watching more closely. The woman didn't look like the usual homeless people he saw on the streets. Even in her tattered clothes, there was something about her that still seemed decent, as if she had only recently fallen over the edge. He frowned, torn. It was late, and he had an important trial in the morning. But then, a feeling he couldn't explain kept him from driving on. He pulled over and stepped out, the cold instantly wrapping around him. Emma looked up at the sound of footsteps, her tired eyes wary. "I don't need help," she said, her voice hoarse and so faint it was almost carried away by the wind. Ethan stopped a few steps away, careful not to come closer so she wouldn't feel threatened. "You're not okay," he said, his voice low but gentle. "In this cold, you won't last long." Emma shook her head and tried to stand, but her legs trembled too much to hold her weight. I'm fine," she mumbled. But at that moment, the light in her eyes dimmed. She collapsed, unconscious, her thin body crumpling onto the bench. Ethan reacted instantly, rushing forward to catch her before she hit the ground. He checked her pulse and realized she was still breathing, but her heartbeat was weak and her body ice cold. Without hesitation, he lifted her into his arms, placed her carefully in the back seat, and turned the heater on full blast. As he looked at her pale face, Ethan knew he couldn't leave her out here tonight. He drove toward his law office, where he knew there was a small room on the top floor, a place he often stayed when working late. In his heart, a decision had already formed. Whoever she was, he wasn't going to let her die in this cold. You're watching Soul Stories, where every story whispers of love, healing, and hope. Let us know which city you're watching from. Don't forget to subscribe and be a part of our journey. Now stay with us. The story is just beginning. Snow was still falling outside, thick white patches sticking to the glass windows of the office building, forming shifting patterns under the dim streetlights. The city at night was strangely silent, leaving only the sound of the wind whistling through the cracks, as if telling the stories of those who had lost their way. Ethan Carter's black sedan glided down the empty streets, neon signs casting their glow over the car's body, reflecting in his pensive eyes. In the back seat, Emma Lewis lay motionless, her pale face almost blending into the color of the snow. Her breathing was shallow, forming wisps of vapor that quickly dissolved in the air, growing warmer from the heater. Ethan gripped the steering wheel tightly, his gaze flicking to the rearview mirror, resting on her face, a face that was both unfamiliar and somehow reminiscent of a story he'd once heard but never fully understood. Ethan's law office occupied the top floor of a modern building, with transparent glass walls overlooking the city swallowed by darkness. The hallway leading to the upper floor was cold, the flickering fluorescent lights casting faint streaks on the tiled floor. Carrying Emma, Ethan walked with steady but careful steps, as if afraid of breaking something fragile. She was so light it unsettled him, her body trembling, her arms limp, her brown hair matted to her forehead from the melted snow. He pushed open the door to the small room he used as a place to rest on nights he worked late. A single bed covered in white sheets, a desk buried in files, and a little kitchenette with an old electric heater. The air smelled faintly of old paper and coffee, mixed with the dry warmth from the heater. Ethan set Emma down on the bed, his movements gentle but firm. He pulled the blanket over her, his gaze lingering on her face a moment longer than necessary. She had high cheekbones, gently arched eyebrows, but her bluish lips and the dark circles under her eyes betrayed the exhaustion of long months. He didn't know her story, but he recognized the look of someone the world had turned its back on, a look he had seen in the eyes of many clients crushed by the legal system. Ethan turned on the heater, its soft hum breaking the silence. He moved to the kitchenette to boil some water, his actions practiced even as his mind kept turning. "Why am I doing this?" he asked himself. Was it the instinct of an attorney, or simply the inability to bear the thought of leaving another human being out in the blizzard? He called David, his personal physician. "I need you to come over right away," Ethan said, his voice low but resolute. "A woman is exhausted, possibly hypothermic, not critical, but she needs to be checked." He glanced toward Emma, a fleeting sense of helplessness crossing his mind. He was used to facing complex cases, but standing in front of a stranger, trembling on the edge between life and death, he suddenly felt small. Emma awoke in an unfamiliar world. The soft yellow glow of a desk lamp made her blink, her head spinning as if she'd just escaped a nightmare. She was no longer at the bus station, where the cold had stabbed into her like knives. Instead, she lay on a bed. Warm blankets wrapped around her, heat from a heater seeping into her stiff muscles. But the comfort only made her panic. "Where am I?" she whispered, her voice hoarse, her hands clutching the blanket as if it were the only thing tethering her to reality. Her heart pounded, memories of the snow-covered night flooding back like a torrent. The freezing bench, the howling wind, and the loneliness so deep she had almost wanted to disappear. "You're awake," a deep voice said, pulling her out of her chaotic thoughts. Emma turned her head, her eyes landing on a man standing in the corner of the room. He was tall, carrying himself with quiet confidence that didn't feel overbearing, his brown eyes calm but touched with concern. His black hair was a bit disheveled, as if he'd had a long day, and the sleeves of his gray shirt were rolled up, revealing strong forearms. His face was sharply defined, with a pronounced jawline and thick eyebrows, but the faint smile on his lips made him look less intimidating. "I'm Ethan Carter," he said, his voice even but sincere. "I found you at the bus station. You passed out from the cold." He stepped closer, but kept enough distance that she wouldn't feel threatened. Emma tensed, her gaze darting around the room, searching for any sign of danger. She wasn't used to trusting strangers, not after everything that had happened. I have to go," she said, her voice shaking as she tried to stand. But her legs refused to cooperate, too weak to hold her, and she sank back onto the bed, her hands clutching her head to fight the dizziness. Inside, she was a mess. Shame, fear, and a dull ache from the months of being cast aside. She had once been a doctor, someone who saved lives, someone respected. Now she was just a shivering ghost, depending on a stranger's kindness. "You're not strong enough yet," Ethan said, his voice still gentle but firm. "I've called a doctor. He'll be here to check on you. Stay here tonight at least until you're a little better." Emma shook her head, her eyes flashing with defiance even though her body could no longer fight. "I don't need pity," she said, her voice cold, though the weakness in it betrayed her. She hated this feeling, this helplessness, the need to rely on someone else. But the truth was, she had no choice. Out there was only snow and darkness, and she wasn't sure she could survive another night. Ethan didn't argue. He simply nodded, took a mug of hot water from the kitchenette, and set it on the table by the bed. "No one pities you," he said, his voice as soft as the wind. "It's just too cold to be outside. You can stay here tonight. I'll be in the next room if you need anything. He looked at her, his gaze free of judgment, simply sincere, as if he understood that any question now would only rub salt into her wounds. The door opened, and a middle-aged man stepped in carrying a medical bag. David, with salt and pepper hair and a kind smile, checked her pulse and temperature. "You have mild hypothermia, but it's not dangerous," he said, his tone professional yet warm. "Rest, drink warm fluids, and eat something. You'll be fine." He exchanged a brief look with Ethan, then left, leaving the room in quiet again. Ethan handed Emma a bowl of hot soup, its simple aroma making her stomach clench with hunger. "I'm not much of a cook, but this is edible," he said, a fleeting smile softening his serious face. Emma looked at the soup, then at him, her heart wavering between gratitude and humiliation. She accepted it, sipping slowly, the warmth spreading through her body like a reminder that she was still alive. Neither of them spoke again. Emma clutched the blanket, her eyes drifting into the empty space. She thought of the days that had passed, of the dreams she once held so fiercely to become a doctor, and how it had all fallen apart simply because she dared to tell the truth. The pain of it weighed on her chest like a stone, making her want to scream, but she stayed silent. Ethan stood, dimmed the lights so the room softened into a gentler glow, the pale warmth like an invisible embrace around her. "Get some rest," he said before he left. "You're safe here." The door closed softly behind him, leaving Emma alone with her tangled thoughts. She lay down, pulling the blanket over her head, trying to stop the tears from coming. Just tonight, she told herself, and then she would find a way to leave. But deep down, a small flicker of something crept into her mind, a fragile sense of peace that, at least for this night, she was no longer alone. The morning light slipped through the thin curtains, casting pale stripes across the wooden floor of the small room. The heater had stopped humming, but its warmth still lingered, like a final comfort before Emma Lewis opened her eyes. She sat up, her messy brown hair falling over her face, partly hiding eyes that were tired but resolute. The room was quiet, only the steady ticking of a wall clock reminding her that time waited for no one, not even those who had lost everything. Emma looked around, her gaze landing on the bowl of soup, now cold on the table. The warmth and kindness of the man named Ethan Carter the night before now felt suffocating. She didn't want to owe anyone, didn't want to carry the weight of someone's charity. She stood, her legs still trembling but steadier than the night before. Her old coat, now dry but still threadbare, was draped over her shoulders like a flimsy shield. Emma had no real plan, but she knew she had to leave. Staying here, in this unfamiliar space, only made her feel weaker. She quietly folded the blanket and set it neatly on the bed, as if trying to erase any sign she'd ever been there. Inside, a voice whispered, "You don't belong here. Leave before they see you as a burden." The door opened softly and Ethan stepped in, holding a cup of hot coffee. He wore a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, his face clear but carrying the weariness of a late night. His brown eyes passed over Emma and immediately took in her intent. "You're leaving this early?" he asked, his voice low but without judgment. Emma nodded, avoiding his eyes. "Thank you for last night," she said, her voice hoarse and small, as if each word had to be forced out. "But I have to go. I don't want to trouble you any further." Ethan didn't answer right away. He set the coffee on the table and pulled a silver-gray business card from his pocket, the lettering reading, "Ethan Carter, Attorney. If you need help, legal advice, work, anything, call me," he said, offering her the card. "I know people. They might need someone like you." Emma looked at the card, her fingers hesitating on the edge of the paper. She wanted to refuse, to say she didn't need help, but the sincerity in Ethan's eyes made her pause. She took it, quickly tucking it into her coat pocket, mumbling a soft, "Thank you," before stepping toward the door. Ethan didn't stop her. He only watched her thin figure disappear down the hallway, a flicker of unease stirring in his chest. He wondered whether he had done enough or if he was just another passerby in her sad story. The day passed like an unending nightmare. Emma wandered the snow-covered streets, her old shoes soaked through and numbing her toes. She stopped at every hospital, clinic, even the smallest health centers, clutching her wrinkled resume. But every time the answer was the same: "We're not hiring." Or worse, the wary look on the interviewer's face when they heard her name. The lawsuit against her former hospital had left a stain she couldn't erase, like a bright red mark across her reputation. Emma stood on the sidewalk watching crowds rush past, feeling like an invisible ghost. "I used to save lives," she thought. "Now I can't even save myself." Inside, she was a battlefield. The pride of a doctor who had once stood in the operating room, holding life itself in her hands, now clashed with the despair of someone who had no home. She told herself she had to be strong, had to find work, but every door that slammed shut felt like a punch to her chest. By the time dusk fell and the snow began again, Emma realized she had nowhere left to go. Her pockets were empty, no money for food, let alone a place to sleep. Her feet, as if guided by some invisible force, carried her back to the office building where Ethan worked. She stood there beneath the dull glow of the streetlight, looking up at the bright windows on the top floor. She hadn't come to knock, hadn't come to beg. It was just that, in all the cold places in this city, this was the only one that had ever felt safe. She sat down on the steps, curling into her coat, her arms wrapped around her knees. "Just for a moment," she told herself, "then I'll keep moving." But the cold crept in again, making her shiver, and inside, a frail voice finally admitted, "I don't have the strength anymore." Upstairs, Ethan sat in front of his computer, the blue glow highlighting the tired lines around his eyes. He was reviewing case files, but he couldn't stop thinking about the woman from that morning. There was something about Emma, a mixture of resilience and fragility, that wouldn't let him go. When the alert from the security camera chimed, he glanced at the screen and his heart stopped. Emma was sitting there on the steps, small and alone in the snowstorm. Without hesitation, Ethan got up, threw on his coat, and rushed down the stairs. The cold wind swept in as he opened the door, and Emma looked up, her eyes wide in surprise. "You shouldn't be out here," he said, his voice worried but gentle. "Come on up, it's freezing." Emma shook her head, pressing her lips together, but her eyes betrayed her exhaustion. I don't want to be a bother," she whispered, her voice nearly lost to the wind. But Ethan didn't let her finish. He reached out not to touch her, but to gesture toward the door. "You're not bothering anyone. Come on, at least let me make you a cup of tea." Emma looked at him, torn. The pride inside her screamed that she should stand up and leave, but her body, frozen and spent, had given up. She nodded, slowly pushing herself to her feet, and followed Ethan inside. When the glass door closed behind them, the wind was left outside, and for the first time that day, Emma felt a hint of warmth, not just from the heater, but from the eyes of the man leading her upstairs. The morning light streamed through the window, casting pale streaks across the white walls of the small room on the top floor of the office building. Emma Lewis sat on the edge of the bed, her hands clutching the blanket, her gaze lost as she looked out at the city waking up beyond the glass. Snow was still falling, but softer now, like silent cotton drifting over the noisy streets. The room was warm, the heat from the electric heater mixing with the faint smell of coffee from the kitchenette. But inside Emma, another storm was raging. She wasn't used to this fragile safety, wasn't used to the thought that she was relying on a stranger's kindness. Her face, is still pale, had regained a hint of life, but her gray eyes held a mix of resilience and hurt, as if she was trying to hide a wound that hadn't healed. Ethan Carter walked in, carrying a small tray with bread and a cup of hot tea. He wore a gray shirt, the sleeves rolled up, his dark hair slightly tousled, but his face clear, carrying the calm confidence of someone accustomed to facing difficult situations. His brown eyes passed over Emma, immediately recognizing the tension in the way she sat, her shoulders slightly hunched as if ready to defend herself. "You should eat something," he said, placing the tray on the table beside the bed, his voice gentle but firm. "And I've arranged for you to stay here for a week. There's an empty room at the end of the hall. It's not fancy, but it's enough for you to rest and get your strength back." Emma looked up, surprise and wariness crossing her face. "A week," she repeated, her voice hoarse as if she didn't dare believe such generosity. I can't stay that long. I have nothing to give you in return." Her words were edged with bitterness, as if helplessness had seeped into every syllable. She clenched her hands, her nails digging into her palms as she tried to hold back the wave of shame rising in her chest. Ethan sat in the chair across from her, leaving enough space so she wouldn't feel cornered. "You don't owe me anything," he said, his voice low but sincere. "I just think you need some time to stand back up. I don't know your story, but I'm guessing it's not simple. If you want to tell me, you can. If you don't, I won't ask." He paused, watching her, seeing the battle playing out behind her tired eyes. Emma stayed silent, her gaze sinking to the cup of steaming tea. She didn't want to open up, didn't want to show her weakness. But something in Ethan's voice, no judgment, no pity, only patience, made the words slip out. "I used to be a doctor," she said, her voice soft but clear, as if she was forcing herself to face her past. "A resident at a big hospital. Something happened and I lost everything. Now I'm just this." She gestured toward the threadbare coat hanging on the chair, a brief, self-mocking smile flickering over her lips. Ethan listened without interrupting. He could hear the pain in every word, but he also saw the stubborn spark that still smoldered in her. "You did the right thing," he said after a moment, his voice steady, "and that doesn't make you a failure. You need time, Emma. Use this week to recover and start looking for work again. You're a doctor. This city always needs people like you." Emma looked at him, her eyes wavering between doubt and a fragile glimmer of hope. She wanted to believe him, but the fear of rejection, of being betrayed again, held her back. "I'll try," she said, her voice low but determined. "But I'll do it myself. I don't want to rely on anyone anymore." Ethan nodded, a small smile crossing his face. "I respect that, but if you ever need someone to open a door, I'm here." He stood, leaving her with a tray of food and a strange feeling, as if for the first time in months, someone actually saw her. Not as a victim, but as a human being. That night, in the empty room Ethan had prepared, Emma sat at a small wooden desk, the desk lamp's light shining over the wrinkled sheets of paper. She worked on job applications, each line of text typed on the old laptop she'd borrowed from the office. Her fingers trembled, not just from the cold, but from the fear of failing again. She sent her resume to community health centers, places that might not care about the stain on her record. Every application was a tiny spark of hope, but also a reminder of all the doors that had slammed shut the day before. She worked late into the night, her eyes stinging, but she didn't stop. "I have to get back up," she told herself. "No one else can do it for me." Meanwhile, in the room next door, Ethan sat at his desk, the computer screen casting pale light over his face. He flipped through his contacts, searching for the number of an old friend, the director of a nonprofit medical organization he had once provided legal help to. He knew the group specialized in offering healthcare to the homeless and low-income families, a place where a doctor like Emma could shine. "She's a good physician," he said into the phone, his voice persuasive but not forceful. "She's been through a lot, but I believe she can do great work. Please just give her a chance to interview." The person on the other end agreed, and Ethan hung up, his eyes drifting to the window where the snow still fell silently. He didn't tell Emma about the call. He knew she wanted to stand on her own, and he respected that. But he also knew that sometimes a hand reaching out at the right moment could change everything. He looked toward the hallway leading to her room, wondering whether she would find the light she needed, or whether the darkness of her past would keep pulling her under. Emma, in the small room, closed the laptop and leaned back in the chair, exhausted. She didn't know about Ethan's phone call, didn't know that somewhere a door was quietly cracking open. But for the first time in months, she felt a tiny spark inside her. Not hope, exactly, but resolve. She would fight, even if it meant doing it alone. Still following the story? If this story found you outside of Soul Stories, we invite you home to where every touching tale begins with truth, hope, and heart. The community health center sat tucked away on an old street, where the low, dusty buildings clashed with the gleaming skyscrapers downtown. The center's building had only 2 floors, its white paint peeling to reveal blotches of red brick underneath. The glass entrance door, etched with the faded words Haven Community Health Center, rattled whenever the wind blew through. Inside, the narrow hallways were filled with the mingled smells of antiseptic and the dampness left behind by long rains. The main clinic was a cramped space lined with plastic chairs in no particular order, a few worn examination tables, and metal shelves packed with crumpled patient files. All the medical equipment was old, from the wheezing blood pressure monitor to the stethoscope worn smooth with use. In one corner, a makeshift dispensary kept rows of generic medication bottles, neatly arranged but always in short supply. The noise never stopped. Patients coughing, children crying, nurses exchanging hurried instructions. There was no VIP waiting room, no touchscreen kiosks, no automated call system. Everything was rough, humble, and full of shortcomings. Compared to the prestigious hospital where Emma had once worked, this center felt like another world. At the old hospital, everything glistened with perfection, gleaming marble floors, the most advanced machines, waiting rooms perfumed with essential oils, and patients from the city's upper crust. The doctors there, including Emma, always appeared in spotless white coats, respected and sought after. The atmosphere was a cold professionalism where efficiency came before emotion. Emma had once been proud to walk those halls, once felt she was part of something grand. But that very system had betrayed her, casting her out simply because she dared to expose corruption. She had just been hired as a temporary physician here, thanks to Ethan's recommendation through the medical nonprofit. When she first walked into the community health center, Emma felt as if she had been thrown down a rung in life. Standing in the exam room, holding a battered stethoscope, her eyes swept over the patients in their tattered clothes, and a wave of shame rose in her chest. I used to work with the wealthy in complex surgeries, she thought. Now I'm here with people no one cares about. She felt as if she had been demoted, as though all her years of study and dedication had been tossed into some forgotten corner of society. Each time she dressed a wound for a homeless person or prescribed medicine for a worker who couldn't afford insurance, she wrestled with her own feelings of inadequacy. The pride she once carried as a top hospital doctor was tested by the tired eyes of her patients and the center's lack of resources. She worked grudgingly, as if only trying to survive the day, her gaze often distant, her lips pressed tight to hide her disappointment in herself. But then small moments began to change her. One morning, while checking the vitals of an elderly man, he took her hand, his clouded eyes shining with gratitude. "You're the first person who really listened to me," he said, his voice trembling. Emma froze, her heart tightening. She remembered the old hospital, where she rarely had time to talk with patients, where everything revolved around performance and reputation. Here, she wasn't just treating illness, she was offering a sliver of hope to those society had forgotten. Another afternoon, after she bandaged a homeless boy's wound, his bright smile as she handed him a piece of candy made her smile back without thinking. "I'm doing something that matters," she thought, and for the first time, the thought wasn't drowned out by shame. Gradually, Emma began to see the center differently. She realized that, despite everything it lacked, this place held something the old hospital never had: uncalculated compassion. The nurses, though exhausted, still smiled at the patients. The volunteers, though unpaid, worked with all their hearts. Emma began to feel like she belonged here not because she had no other choice, but because she had found purpose. She no longer saw the center as a symbol of her fall, but as a place where she could make a real difference. Her eyes grew brighter, her movements gentler, and her rare smiles began to carry genuine warmth. Ethan became an essential part of Emma's transformation. He often stopped by the center at the end of the day, bringing coffee or a box of pastries from the bakery near his office. He'd arrive in rolled-up shirt sleeves, his dark hair tousled by the wind, his brown eyes always sincere. "You look better," he said once, catching her smiling at a patient. "This place suits you." Emma shrugged, but deep down she knew he was right. Ethan's presence was like a steady anchor, never imposing, but solid enough to remind her she wasn't alone. One night, with the pale moon hanging over the city, Emma joined the center's street outreach team. They moved beneath overpasses and along dark corners, handing out blankets and doing health checks for people curled against the early spring cold. Ethan appeared unexpectedly, bundled in a heavy coat, carrying a bag of clean but worn blankets from his office. "I heard the team needed extra hands," he said, smiling gently when he saw Emma's surprised expression. She didn't say anything, but his presence steadied her, like a lantern shining through the darkness. They stopped at an old stoop, the dim streetlight illuminating patches of peeling paint. Emma sat down, cupping the hot coffee Ethan handed her, her breath mingling with the cold night air. Ethan sat beside her, far enough not to crowd her, but close enough that she could feel his warmth. Neither spoke, listening instead to the wind and the distant traffic. Then, as if urged by the quiet, Emma began to talk. "I made a mistake," she whispered, her eyes fixed on the cup. "Not because I did the wrong thing, but because I was too naive." She drew a shaky breath, her voice thin. "I blew the whistle on the hospital leadership. They falsified research data, ignored patients who couldn't pay. I thought if I spoke up, it would change something. But they were stronger. They framed me, stripped my license, sued me for defamation. My friends, they all turned their backs, like I was something poisonous." Her voice faltered, but she didn't cry. The grief had dried up, leaving only bitterness and regret. Ethan listened, his face steady, but his eyes reflecting a quiet empathy. "You weren't wrong," he said, his voice low and sure. "You chose the harder path, and that makes you stronger than they'll ever be." Emma looked at him, her gaze wavering between skepticism and gratitude. "Strong?" She let out a dry, self-mocking laugh. "All I see is failure." But Ethan didn't look away, as if willing her to reclaim the faith she'd lost. "You're here saving lives," he said. "If that's not strength, I don't know what is." He smiled a genuine, unforced smile, and in that moment, Emma felt a small light flicker inside her chest. Not just hope, but the affirmation that she still mattered, that she was finding herself again, day by day, in the cramped but meaningful rooms of the community health center. She smiled back at him. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for giving me a chance to find where I belong." The top-floor office of Ethan Carter's law firm glowed in the soft amber light of an old desk lamp, illuminating thick stacks of files and the computer screen filled with legal documents. The air carried the rich scent of strong coffee and old paper, mingling with the steady hum of the electric heater, creating a space both warm and tense. Emma sat across from Ethan, medical reports spread between them, evidence related to a major lawsuit he was handling about counterfeit drugs that had killed dozens of patients. She wore the white coat of the community health center, her brown hair pulled back neatly, but her gray eyes held both focus and a flicker of unease. Her face, though still pale, had regained some vitality thanks to the meaningful work she had found at the clinic. Ethan, in his rolled-up shirt sleeves and slightly tousled dark hair, slid a file toward Emma. "I need you to look over these medical reports," he said, his voice low but persuasive. "This case involves a pharmaceutical company supplying fake medication. There are details only a doctor like you will fully understand. If you're willing, I'd like you to be the medical expert witness to provide testimony." He met her eyes directly, his brown gaze not only full of trust, but also an unspoken invitation to step out of the shadow of her past. Emma touched the file, her fingers trembling slightly. A rush of mixed feelings filled her, honored by Ethan's confidence in her, but afraid her history, the lawsuit against her old hospital, would cast doubt on her credibility. "Are you sure?" she asked quietly, her voice sharp but unsure. "My record. It's not clean. They'll use it to attack you." Ethan smiled, a small expression that was both steady and comforting. "I don't care about your record, Emma. I care about the truth, and I know you can help us find it." His words felt like a warm breeze blowing through the defenses she had spent so long building. Emma nodded, her gratitude unspoken. She didn't say it aloud, but she knew that for the first time in months, someone was looking at her not as a failure, but as someone who mattered. In the weeks that followed, Emma and Ethan worked side by side, late into the night at the office. Ethan's desk became the center of their animated discussions, with Emma explaining complex medical terminology and Ethan strategizing how to present it in court. They sat close, sometimes their shoulders brushing as they studied the same document, the computer's glow lighting their faces. Emma, her voice growing more confident each day, felt like she was alive again in her role as a doctor. Ethan, sharp and patient, always listened to her carefully, asked questions to clarify, and sometimes smiled when she offered a particularly insightful explanation. "You're really good at this," he said once, his eyes shining with admiration that made Emma flush. Those long nights were about more than work. Between piles of files and cups of cooling coffee, they began to share little stories. Emma told him about her days as a med student, about the dream of saving lives that had driven her. Ethan spoke of his first cases, how he decided to become a lawyer to defend people crushed by the system. They laughed when Ethan admitted he once burned out a coffee maker in the microwave, and Emma teased that she had once fallen asleep in her medical school library. Those moments, small as they were, drew them closer, like two puzzle pieces slowly finding where they belonged. Their feelings for each other grew quietly. Neither of them spoke of it, but both felt it. It was there in the way Ethan's gaze lingered on Emma a little too long, in how she smiled unconsciously when he spoke. It was the trust built over hours of working side by side, in the times Ethan would gently set a hand on her shoulder in encouragement, or when Emma's fingers brushed his as she passed him a document. Neither dared to name it, but it was there, a small flame burning steadily in the dark. One late evening, as the city disappeared under a thin layer of fog, Emma gathered her things to leave the office. She shrugged on her coat, her hair slightly tousled after a long day, but her face was alight with a new kind of confidence. Ethan stood, insisting on walking her to her car. "It's cold," he said, his voice a little uncertain, as if searching for a reason to extend the moment. They walked down the stairs, the quiet broken only by their footsteps and the wind rattling against the glass. Under the dim streetlight, Ethan stopped beside the old clinic car Emma borrowed for work. She turned to say goodbye, but the look in Ethan's eyes made her freeze. His brown gaze, usually calm and shrewd, now held an unfamiliar uncertainty. He lifted a hand and gently touched hers, his fingers warm against the night's chill. "Emma," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper, "thank you for agreeing to help me, and I'm glad you're here." Emma felt her heart beating fast, the heat from his touch melting away the last of her guarded walls. She looked at him, her lips parting as if to speak, but no words came. For a moment, beneath the streetlight and the drifting fog, it felt as if the world had shrunk to just the two of them. Ethan squeezed her hand lightly, his gaze unsteady, as if he was wrestling with something inside himself. Then he let go, stepping back with a small, reluctant smile. "Drive safe," he said, his voice rough. Emma nodded, climbing into the car, her heart still pounding. As she pulled away, she glanced in the rearview mirror and saw Ethan still standing there, his tall figure slowly fading into the fog. She didn't know exactly what was growing between them, but for the first time in so long, she no longer felt alone. Noonlight poured into the courtroom through the tall glass windows, casting bright patterns across the polished wooden benches and the tense faces of everyone involved. The counterfeit drug trial, where Emma had provided expert medical testimony and Ethan had led the litigation, ended in a resounding victory. The court ruled that the pharmaceutical company was liable and ordered them to pay millions in damages to the victims. When the judge struck the gavel, the room erupted in applause, and Ethan's eyes immediately sought out Emma, who stood quietly in a corner. She wore a simple white medical coat, her brown hair pulled into a neat ponytail, her gray eyes shining with relief and exhaustion. Ethan, in his dark gray suit, allowed himself a rare smile, his gaze bright with undisguised pride. They had done it, not only won the case, but brought justice to people who had been forgotten. Outside the courtroom, reporters crowded every exit, flashes from cameras firing nonstop. Headlines spread quickly. Attorney Ethan Carter and Dr. Emma Lewis expose counterfeit drug scandal. Brave duo take on Big Pharma. Emma read the headlines on her phone, her heart racing, but not from happiness. For the first time in months, her name was being spoken with respect. But deep down, she was still afraid that this light was temporary, that her past would come back to pull her under again. Just hours after their victory, another storm struck. Emma's old hospital, the one that had stripped her of her license and reputation, launched a smear campaign across social media and tabloid sites. The vicious articles spread fast. Dr. Emma Lewis, mentally unstable, fired for unprofessional conduct. Can her testimony in the counterfeit drug trial be trusted? They were accompanied by old photos of Emma taken during her lowest days, her eyes hollow, her body slumped in exhaustion. Every line felt like a knife, reopening wounds she had tried so hard to bury. Emma sat curled up in the small office at the community health center, the glow of her phone screen washing over her pale face. She clutched her arms around herself, her breathing ragged. The past came flooding back like a tidal wave. The interrogations, the suspicious stares from colleagues, the loneliness when the entire world turned away. She'd thought she was stronger now, thought the clinic work and Ethan's support were enough to keep her steady. But now she felt herself slipping into the abyss again, as if all her efforts had been meaningless. They will never let me be, she thought, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. A knock sounded at the door light, but insistent. Emma flinched, quickly wiping her face. But before she could stand, Ethan stepped inside. He wore a thick coat, his dark hair soaked from the drizzle outside, his brown eyes full of concern when he saw her. "I saw the news," he said, his voice low but strong. "Emma, don't read it alone." He pulled up a chair beside her without waiting for permission and gently took the phone from her hands. He scrolled through the articles, his expression growing harder, but when he looked back at her, his eyes were still soft. They sat like that for hours, reading every filthy headline together. Ethan didn't say much, only breaking the silence occasionally to murmur, "This is a lie," or "They have no evidence." His steady presence, solid as a mountain, made it easier to breathe. But the pain inside her didn't fade. She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking, and after a long silence, she choked out, "I'm so tired, Ethan. So tired I just want to disappear. I can't do this anymore. I can't keep fighting like this." Ethan didn't answer right away, but his eyes filled with sorrow. He laid a hand on her shoulder, firm yet gentle, then drew her into his arms. Emma stiffened for a moment before letting herself sink into his embrace, letting his warmth wrap around her. He held her tight, as if he could shield her from the whole world. "You don't have to go anywhere," he whispered, his voice hoarse, almost trembling. "I'm here, Emma. I won't let you be alone." She looked up, her tear-filled eyes meeting his. In that moment, under the dim office light, in the soft patter of rain against the window, every barrier between them seemed to vanish. Ethan lowered his head, hesitant, then pressed his lips to hers. Their first kiss was trembling, exhausted, and full of longing. Two souls who had been lost finally finding each other. Emma kissed him back, her hands fisting in his coat as if clinging to an anchor in the storm. The kiss didn't last long, but it was enough to melt the walls she had built around her heart. When they parted, their breaths mingling in the cold air, Ethan kept holding her, his forehead resting against hers. "We'll get through this," he said firmly. Emma didn't reply, only nodded, tears still falling, but this time, she didn't feel alone. In his arms, she felt a flicker of light, not enough to erase the past, but enough to keep fighting. Light from the tall windows of Ethan Carter's law office spilled across the desk, illuminating neat stacks of legal documents beside tabloid articles, still smearing Emma. The air felt heavy, filled only by the soft clack of keys and the steady hum of the electric heater. Emma sat across from Ethan, her hands clenched tightly in her lap, her gray eyes darting anxiously over the cruel headlines. "Unstable doctor in counterfeit drug trial." The truth about Emma Lewis, victim or fraud. Her brown hair was loosely tied back, a few strands falling across her pale cheek as if she were trying to hide from the world. Ethan, wearing his dark gray suit, his face sharp but his brown eyes steady, pushed a sheet of paper across the desk to her. "I'm going to be your attorney," he said, his voice low and resolute. "We're going to sue your old hospital to clear your name." Emma looked up, her eyes wide with shock. "Sue them?" she echoed, her voice trembling. "Ethan, you know how powerful they are. They have money, connections, and they won't stop." Fear surged through her, an old fire rekindled from cold ashes. The thought of confronting the hospital again, the place that had destroyed her career and her pride, made her want to curl up, to run away. Ethan leaned forward, locking his gaze onto hers so she couldn't look away. "They're strong, but they're not invincible," he said. "You survived this once, and you're stronger than they ever believed. You deserve to have your honor restored, Emma. Not just for you, but for the patients you tried to protect when you spoke out. His words swept through the chaos in her mind like a gust of wind, bringing clarity and a strength she'd forgotten she had. The media pressure escalated quickly after Ethan announced he would represent Emma in the lawsuit against the hospital. Reporters crowded outside the community health center, camera flashes popping every time Emma appeared. New articles emerged questioning her motives, dredging up her past with twisted half-truths. One morning, as Emma stepped out of the clinic, a reporter blocked her path, shoving a microphone close to her face. "Dr. Lewis, are you really mentally unstable, like the hospital claims?" Emma froze, her heart pounding, her hands clutching her bag so hard her knuckles whitened. Fear squeezed her chest, but she lowered her head and hurried past the crowd, her heart heavy. In the nights that followed, Emma hardly slept. She sat alone in her small room at the clinic, the blue glow of her phone screen illuminating her exhausted face. She read and reread the articles, each line feeling like another blade. She felt drained. She wanted to quit, to tell Ethan she didn't have the strength to keep going. But every time she opened her mouth to say so, the unshakable look in his eyes stopped her. He never pressured her, but his presence, steady, sincere, was a quiet reminder that she wasn't alone. One evening, as they sat in Ethan's office amid piles of files and cooling coffee, Emma broke down. "I don't know if I can keep doing this," she whispered, her voice cracking. "They're never going to let me be, Ethan. Maybe I should just disappear, let it all end." Ethan stood without a word, came around the desk, and knelt so his eyes were level with hers. "You don't have to disappear," he said, his voice low but fierce. "You deserve to have your name cleared, and I'll be here every step of the way until that happens." His words anchored her, holding her steady in the storm. Emma drew a shaky breath, wiped her tears, and nodded. "All right," she whispered. "I'll stand in court. I'll tell the truth." That decision didn't erase her fear, but it gave her purpose a reason to keep fighting. The morning of the trial arrived. Emma stood in front of the mirror in her small room, adjusting her white medical coat. She looked at her reflection, seeing not a victim, but someone resilient. She was a doctor, a survivor, and now she was ready to face her past. She had done nothing wrong, and she was ready to defend herself and justice. As the hearing began, Emma stepped up to the witness stand. Her voice, though shaky at first, grew clear and strong. She told everything: how the hospital had falsified research data, neglected poor patients, and framed her to cover it up. Each word she spoke cut through the hospital's polished facade like a blade, and Ethan, standing at the counsel table, guided her with precise questions, his gaze never leaving hers, a silent promise that he would not let her fall. Gradually, public opinion began to shift. New headlines appeared, praising Emma's courage. "Young doctor takes on powerful hospital." The truth behind Emma Lewis's lawsuit: people who had once believed the smears started to stand with her. Social media filled with words of support, and patients from the community clinic began sharing their own stories, calling her the doctor for the forgotten. Emma read those messages in her small office at the clinic, and for the first time she smiled a real smile, unforced. She looked out the window at the city still in motion and felt a genuine flicker of hope. Ethan walked in, carrying a cup of hot tea, his eyes bright with pride. "You did it," he said softly but firmly. Emma nodded, saying nothing, but her eyes said everything. She had found herself again, and she knew he was the one who had helped her do it. You're watching Soul Stories exclusive to our channel. If you're still with us, drop a comment. We read and cherish them all. Subscribe to support more heartfelt, original stories. Thanks for being part of the Soul Stories family. The courtroom lay under a heavy, tense silence, broken only by the rustle of papers from the clerk and the soft murmurs of the spectators. Light poured through the tall windows onto the wooden floor, scattering in glimmering patches as if trying to drive away the weight of the trial that had dragged on for days. Emma sat on the witness bench, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her gray eyes fixed on the judge. She wore a simple dark blue suit, her brown hair tied low, her face pale but carrying a steadiness that could not be shaken. Beside her, Ethan Carter stood tall in a dark gray suit, his sharp features intent as he watched every movement. In the days leading up to this moment, they had faced the opposing counsel's cutting questions and the hospital's final attempts to smear Emma's name. But every answer she gave, every argument Ethan delivered, landed like hammer blows cracking the polished facade of their adversaries. The trial was more than a legal battle, it was Emma's journey to reclaim herself. Each night after the proceedings, she sat in Ethan's small office, reviewing her notes, preparing for the next day, and sometimes breaking down under the strain. Ethan was always there. He never demanded she be stronger than she felt. He simply brewed her hot tea or rested a steady hand on her shoulder, lending her strength by being there. Now, as the judge prepared to deliver the verdict, Emma felt her heart racing, not just with fear, but with a fragile hope that she might finally close this chapter of her life. The judge, a middle-aged woman with a solemn face, adjusted her glasses and began to read. This court finds Dr. Emma Lewis not guilty of all accusations of defamation and unprofessional conduct. Her medical license is hereby fully restored. The gavel struck, loud and final, like the punctuation to all her darkest days. The courtroom erupted in applause, but Emma just sat frozen, unable to believe what she had heard. She turned to Ethan, her gray eyes brimming with tears, and found him watching her, his own eyes shining. He reached for her hand under the table, his fingers warm and steady. "You did it," he whispered, his voice hoarse but full of feeling. Emma clutched his hand, tears streaming down her face, not out of pain, but from a release she had never dared to dream of. When they stepped out of the courthouse, the gentle afternoon light of early spring wrapped around them, but so did the crowd of reporters, flashes firing in rapid succession, microphones shoved toward her. Emma's hand tightened in Ethan's, her breath catching as questions came in a barrage. "Dr. Lewis, how does it feel to be vindicated? Do you plan to sue the hospital for damages?" She opened her mouth, but her throat closed up, no words coming. The months of being hunted by the press and slandered publicly had left scars she still carried. Ethan stepped forward, his tall frame shielding her from the cameras. He lifted a hand, his deep voice cutting through the chaos clear, unwavering. "Dr. Emma Lewis is not just a victim of a corrupt system. She is someone who had the courage to stand up for the truth. She is the finest doctor I have ever known and the woman I love." His declaration rippled through the crowd, bringing a stunned hush for a heartbeat. Reporters blinked, stunned, before the shouting questions resumed with renewed fervor, but Ethan ignored them. He turned to Emma, his warm brown eyes fixed on hers as if the world had fallen away, leaving only them. Emma stared up at him, her tear-bright eyes wide with emotion. His words, open and without hesitation, were like a flame thawing the last ice around her heart. She couldn't speak. Instead, she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him, burying her face against his chest. The crowd, the cameras, the noise, everything faded. In Ethan's arms, she felt safe, loved, and more than anything, seen for who she truly was. He held her tightly, bending his head to whisper into her hair, "We did it, Emma." She nodded, her tears soaking into his shirt, but this time, they were tears of happiness. As they walked away hand in hand, the sunlight fell across their silhouettes, like a promise of a new beginning. Behind them, the reporters continued snapping pictures, but now the stories to be written would tell something different, a story about a woman who fought and won, and the man who stood by her through every storm. A year had passed, and the city still carried its familiar energy, but under the brilliant summer sun, the Haven Community Health Center had transformed. The old two-story building was freshly painted, the bright white facade highlighting the words Haven Community Health Center etched across the glass entrance. Inside, the hallways had been refurnished with new waiting chairs, and the exam rooms upgraded with more modern equipment, though the place retained the humble feel of somewhere meant for the forgotten. Emma was now the director of the center, standing in the reception area, her gray eyes glowing with pride. Her brown hair was tied up neatly, and her clean white coat hugged her slender frame. Her smile, still rare, now carried a vibrant warmth. She had become a symbol of resilience, a doctor who had lost everything but rose again, not only to save herself, but to care for hundreds of others. Patients called her the Doctor of Hope, and stories of her dedication spread through the city from the underpasses to the slums. Meanwhile, Ethan had also found a new path. He had left his old law firm to establish his own practice, focused on defending the rights of the vulnerable from exploited workers to victims of injustice like Emma had been. His office, not far from the clinic, was a modern yet welcoming space, with glass walls overlooking the city and bookshelves filled with legal texts. Ethan, whose dark hair now carried a few silver strands from countless late nights, still wore that sharp gaze and sincere smile. He often stopped by the clinic, not only to offer legal advice, but simply to see Emma, the woman who had become the center of his world. The dedication ceremony for the center's new free clinic wing took place on a radiant summer day, sunlight filtering through rows of green trees and casting dancing shadows across the courtyard. The new clinic, with clean exam rooms and a special waiting area for children, was the product of a year of tireless work by Emma and her team. A crowd gathered patients, volunteers, donors, and erupted into applause as Emma cut the ceremonial ribbon. She stood on the small stage wearing a simple pale blue dress, her eyes shining as she spoke about the center's mission. This place is not only about healing illness, it is about restoring hope. Everyone who walks through these doors deserves care, deserves love. From the crowd, Ethan watched her, his gaze never leaving her face. He wore a white shirt with rolled sleeves, his expression alight with pride. As Emma finished her speech and the applause rose around them, he stepped onto the stage, his heart hammering as he felt the small velvet box hidden in his pocket. The crowd slowly drifted apart, leaving space for volunteers and patients to mingle. But Ethan raised a hand, signaling everyone to be still. He sank to one knee before Emma, the sun illuminating his face and the emotion in his warm brown eyes. "Emma," he began, his voice low but clear, echoing in the hush that fell over the courtyard. "From the first day I met you, I knew you were someone extraordinary, not only for your courage, but for your heart. You've shown me what love is, standing side by side through the darkest days, building something better together." He opened the velvet box, revealing a simple silver ring that shimmered in the light. "I want to spend my life with you, fighting beside you and smiling beside you. Emma Lewis, will you marry me?" Emma stood frozen, her gray eyes wide, tears shining like diamonds in the sunlight. Around them, the crowd burst into cheers, but she saw only Ethan, the man who had pulled her from the edge, who believed in her when no one else did. She began to cry, covering her mouth with her hands, and nodded, her voice breaking. "Yes, Ethan. Yes." He stood, sliding the ring onto her finger before pulling her into a tight embrace as the applause and joyful tears of everyone around them filled the air. The next morning, the city's major newspapers all ran stories about the dedication ceremony and the proposal. One headline stood out, shared across social media: "The couple who redefined love and courage." The article told Emma and Ethan's story from the freezing night they met, through the long struggle for justice, to the moment they vowed to spend their lives together. The photo of Ethan kneeling before Emma, their eyes locked, became a symbol of hope and love that would not surrender. Emma read the article in her small office at the clinic, sitting beside Ethan, her hand laced tightly with his. She smiled, not the strained smile of her past, but one bright and full of life. "We've come a long way, haven't we?" she said softly, her voice full of feeling. Ethan squeezed her hand, his brown eyes warm. "And this is only the beginning," he replied, his smile like a promise. Outside, the city continued to move, but in that little room, they knew that together they could face any storm.